Then God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heavens, to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and seasons and for days and years." Here in Genesis, God gives 4 reasons for creating the lights. The first 2 are for signs and seasons, and only the last 2 are for a calendar, days and years. And what's amazing, the very first reason, when God gives an order, the first one listed is always important. Signs. That's his primary reason. The second reason is for seasons. If we look for that translation of the word seasons, we see that it's really Hebrew moed, and it really means appointed time. Here we look at the translation and we see 8 times the word appointed appears. Only 2 times do we see season. A much better translation would be signs and appointments. The lights are signs for God's appointments. We see this again in Leviticus. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the children of Israel, and say to them, Let the feast of the Lord, which ye shall proclaim to be holy convocations. These are my feasts." Here again we have a poor translation. The word it was translated as seasons is now translated feast, but it's the same Hebrew moed, and it means appointed times or appointments. So these are actually God's appointments. They're not feasts. Matter of fact, there's one of these so-called feasts that's a fast. You don't eat anything. A lot of them do have an associated feast with them, but the more appropriate definition, these are God's appointments. So let's look at the true Hebrew meaning of this verse. The appointments of YHVH, which is Yehovah or Yehovah, which ye shall proclaim to be holy rehearsals. These are my appointments. These were rehearsals. Every year when they were practiced, God's saying these are rehearsals for when I'm going to show up. That's what you do when you make an appointment. You show up. He's made these appointments to show up, but he wanted everybody to rehearse it so they would know what to expect when he showed up. The first appointment was Passover, and it was accomplished in the year 32 on the 14th of Nisan at 3 p.m. After 1,400 years of rehearsing this appointment, guess what? He showed up, just like he said he was going to do. And just as he showed up at 3 p.m. between the evenings, the day is divided into 4 sections, and the daylight is from 6 to 12 is the morning, and from 12 to 6 at night is the evening, and there's a minor evening from 12 to 3, and then the major evening from 3 to 6. So between the evenings is 3 p.m. That's when they sacrificed the Passover lamb, the time of the evening sacrifice. And that's exactly when he showed up, to the day, to the minute, and to the hour, as it was rehearsed. And just as he was on his appointment, fulfilling it, all over Jerusalem, everybody was roasting their Passover lamb over an open flame on a pomegranate stick. Why? Because the Torah said it had to be roast with fire twice. It mentions roast with fire, and they took it very seriously. If it was a metal steak, it would have broiled the meat by getting hot. And they took the entrails out and put it on its head. And unlike this picture, the hide would have been skinned and wrapped around the head too. And the reason that is because the Torah said that you shall roast the entire lamb, entrails and all. And so you can't leave the entrails inside, it'll poison the meat. So they put it on the head, and then they wrap the skin around the entrails. And that's representative of the crown of thorns that Yeshua had. It was called the helmeted sacrifice in the Talmud. And they said it looked like the helmet of a Roman soldier. So at 3 p.m. at Passover, God personally appeared on time to keep his first appointment. Exactly as it had been rehearsed. And not only did he keep the appointment, guess what? There were signs. Signs in the heavens. The sun was turned into darkness. Now it was about the 6th hour, and there was darkness over all the earth until the 9th hour. Now this was not caused by a solar eclipse. It's impossible to have a solar eclipse in the middle of the month when Passover occurs. So whatever the nature of this, it was not through that. But the moon was turned into blood, which is a total lunar eclipse. And here we have NASA's chart showing that there was a lunar eclipse, a total lunar eclipse, on April 14th in the year 32. And if you look at the graph at the bottom, you see the area that saw it. The dark area did not see the eclipse. It's the white area that witnessed it, because over the Pacific Ocean, there's a black spot. That's where the moon was. What's interesting, why is there the dark areas where Israel was? Nobody saw this eclipse. The moon was on the other side of the planet. Well, what good is that? The other people on the other side of the planet wouldn't know what was going on. Why have a total lunar eclipse when nobody knew, nobody even saw it? Well, this eclipse, it started at about 8:20 in the morning, according to NASA, and it ended around 2 p.m. Yeshua was on the cross. He was nailed at 9 a.m. and he lasted till 3 p.m. Almost exactly. Most likely this eclipse was exact, because there's a little bit of error when you go back that far and try to pinpoint the exact hour of an eclipse. So why would God have a total lunar eclipse exactly at the time Yeshua was on the cross, but nobody could see it? Well, it wasn't the fact that they saw it that mattered. It was where in the heavens did this eclipse occur. Here we have a star chart showing exactly at the same time. This is the greatest eclipse, and you see a blood moon is right in the middle of Libra, the balance scales. This is the only constellation that is not an animal, and it symbolizes a balance, like judgment. And the reason there's a blood moon right in the middle of the transverse beam where it crosses the major beam of the balance scale, it's only there in about a 2 or 3 hour period. And yet for a total eclipse to occur exactly as that blood moon is right in the middle, that's a sign. God was showing us that the prince of this world was being judged. He had no right to take a righteous man who had a covenant with God into hell, and it was about to cost him his kingdom. Here we have the signs in the heavens showing exactly what was happening. And guess where Jupiter was at that time? Jupiter represents the Messiah. And we'll see later on that this is Taurus, representative of the throne of heaven, the power of God. And in between the horns, that represents authority. So Yeshua was in a place of authority. Look at how the heavens were showing exactly what was going on the earth. The second appointed time is unleavened bread. That is 3 hours later when you eat the Passover lamb that you just cooked. And the day begins at 6 p.m. in Israel. God starts with evening and morning. Like in Genesis, he says evening and morning were the first day. God never starts with light and ends in darkness. God always ends in light. So we have at 6 p.m. when the day is starting, you have unleavened bread. The first thing they do is they take a piece of matzah and they break it in half. They eat half of it before the meal, and they wrap the other half in linen and hide it until after the meal. So while everybody is breaking this matzah and wrapping it in linen, what is Yeshua doing? His broken body is being wrapped in linen too. He's keeping this appointed time to the exact way it was rehearsed. Not only is he the Passover lamb, he's also the unleavened bread. Exactly to the very minute and hour as it was rehearsed, he kept it. And we also have evidence of the linen he was wrapped in. It's called the Shroud of Turin. It's in the center here. It's not easy to see, but they found out if you take a photograph and show the negative, it shows up much better. So on each side, there's a negative image, and you can definitely see a man. He's been apparently crucified. There's a wound mark on his wrist and on his feet. He has a pierced side, and he has marks all around his head, just like a crown of thorns. Amazing. And here's a close-up image. And the History Channel did a documentary where they showed a 3D refined image of what Yeshua actually looked like. The next appointed time was first fruits. That was during the same week of unleavened bread. There's 7 days of unleavened bread. One of those days is a Sabbath, and the day after the Sabbath is first fruits. We know that's Sunday. What did they do for first fruits? They took the barley harvest had been sown 70 days earlier, and they were harvesting barley. Then it was the first fruits of the barley harvest. They had a ceremony where they harvested at night, and they went through all the process of making it and making flour out of it and presenting it before the Lord. And they did it, and they finished before sunrise. So as they're offering the barley harvest before the Lord, before sunrise, what does Yeshua do? He comes back from the dead, first fruits from the dead, right before sunrise, keeping the appointed time exactly as it had been rehearsed. Amazing. The next appointed time is Pentecost. On Pentecost, the priest takes 2 loaves of bread with leaven, which is unusual because loaves aren't usually presented with leaven. It's symbolic of sin. But here, God commanded him to have leaven in the 2 loaves. And he waves them. He goes back and forth, motion, and he goes up and down, and he waves them up, presenting them to the Lord. That represents Jew and Gentile being brought to the Lord. It's going through the air, so the Spirit is bringing Jew and Gentile to the presence of the Father. So what happens in the year 32 while the priest is waving these loaves of bread at the exact 9 a.m. in the morning when he would have been doing this? The Spirit shows up, and 3,000 people get born again. They get brought before the Father, just like the appointment was rehearsed. It was fulfilled. God is serious about these appointments, and he keeps them to the exact letter as it's rehearsed. Now we have trumpets coming, and it's a pending appointment. We've completed the first 4, but now we have ones that aren't completed. The ones we have to look forward to, and a knowledge of how these are rehearsed gives us a complete plan of how God is going, what he's going to do, and how he's going to fulfill these appointed times. So we have trumpets, and then we have atonement, known as Yom Kippur, and that's pending. And then we have tabernacles. So there's 3 appointments remaining. If we can know the details of these, we'll know exactly what God's going to do. And the best way to understand this is to look at tabernacles, because we get a hint from Zechariah of what this appointed time means. He tells us it's not for the Jews only. And it shall come to pass that everyone who is left of all the nations which came against Jerusalem shall go up from year to year to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, and to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. And it shall be that whichever of the families of the earth do not come up to Jerusalem to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, on them there will be no rain. So here we see this feast, or appointed time, is for the nations. It's for everybody. It's not just for the Jews, and the nations are required to come and keep this. God's appointments are not Jewish appointments. They're his appointments. The Jews were just the first ones to know about it. And so tabernacles, it represents Yeshua's millennial reign on earth as the king. So if we know that, if he's already here on tabernacles, if that's how he fulfills that appointment, let's go backwards, because if he's already here, the appointment before must be his return. So what's the one before? Atonement, or Yom Kippur. Daniel gives us an interesting clue about this return of the Lord, which he calls the time of the end. And some of those of understanding shall fall, to refine them, purify them, and make them white, until the time of the end, because it is still for the appointed time. Here we see the same word that was translated as seasons earlier in Genesis, translated as feast in Leviticus, but it was a wrong translation. Here it's translated right. It's appointed time. You see 3 times in red, it's actually in the definition. They get it right this time. And he says the time of the end is going to be on an appointed time. He tells us it's going to be on an appointment. Why is it difficult to figure out when is the Messiah going to come? How is anybody going to know? Daniel tells us it will be on an appointed time. Well, we've only got 3 appointed times left. We know it is in tabernacles. Pretty much can figure out which one it is. Let Joel tell us the details about when the day of the Lord is, which is the same thing that Daniel calls the time of the end. Blow ye the trumpet in Zion, sound an alarm in my holy mountain. Let all the inhabitants of the land tremble, for the day of the Lord cometh, for it is nigh at hand. A day of darkness and a gloominess, a day of clouds and thick darkness. We're talking about Yom Teruah at this point, the time of alarm. And this is not the day of the Lord yet. He said it comes. It's coming. It's not here, but it's nigh. Yom Teruah is 10 days before Yom Kippur, which is atonement, and which we shall see is the day of the Lord according to Joel. Because he says again, blow the trumpet in Zion. This is the second time. Sanctify a fast. Call a solemn assembly. Yom Kippur is the only appointed time that's a fast, and it is solemn. He's talking about Yom Kippur now. And then he says something amazing. Let the bridegroom go forth of his chamber, and the bride out of her closet. The bride is already in heaven with the groom. When he returns, it says he returns with thousands of his saints, 10,000s of his saints, actually. Well, it makes sense. The bride is with him when he comes. So there's a big hint there. And then we see, let the priest, the ministers of the Lord, weep between the porch and the altar. There is only one appointed time where there is such a service between the porch and the altar. And that's Yom Kippur. When there's a bull, he's tethered between the porch and the altar, and he's sacrificed, and his blood is taken and sprinkled on the drape, separating the Holy of Holies. This is definitely talking about Yom Kippur, and Joel is identifying it as the day of the Lord. That is his return. So we know tabernacles is when he's here for the millennial reign. We know atonement is when he's coming back with his saints, with the bride. So what happens in trumpets? We've got one appointed time left. Something has to happen. God doesn't make an appointment for no reason. So let's see about these trumpets. In the 7th month, on the 1st of the month, you shall have a Sabbath, a memorial acclamation, a teruah, a holy gathering. For you it is a day of teruah, which is translated as blowing the trumpets. God tells us to have this teruah in the 7th month on the 1st day, but he doesn't tell why. All the other appointed times, there's usually a little bit of an idea of why the Passover lamb's being sacrificed, why there's unleavened bread. But here we have no idea. So let's take a closer look at this and see if we can find out what teruah is. There's 4 sounds blown on the shofar. So let's look at these sounds. The first one is a tekiah. And the second one is a shevarim. And then we have the third one, a teruah. And the fourth one, we have a tekiah hagadol, a great long blast, the last shofar. So let's listen to tekiah, but notice the teruah is 9 staccato blasts of alarm to awaken the soul to righteousness. Knowing what a teruah is will tell us what this trumpets is about. It's about an alarm. It's about awakening the soul to righteousness. A wake up sleeper. Let's listen to a tekiah here. Now here's a shevarim. Now a teruah. This is the alarm. Listen to it. And then here's the tekiah hagadol, the long blast. So we have the teruah is an alarm. 9 blast. Wake up. The sound that you make called a teruah tells you what Yom Teruah, the day of Teruah, is about. It's an alarm. Another key about this appointed time of trumpets, Yom Teruah, is what Yeshua said, "Watch therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour in which the Son of Man is coming." He said this after the parable of the 10 virgins. This is a hint that any Jew would know is talking about Yom Teruah. Why? Because it's the only appointed time that occurs at the beginning of the month. And the reason you don't know is because you have to have 2 credible witnesses that appear before the Sanhedrin to verify they saw the first tiny sliver of the new moon. Because you're looking for that tiny sliver. And if you don't get 2 witnesses that tell you, one day it'll be the next day. You don't know when the month starts, and you don't know when this appointed time is till you get 2 witnesses. So we have no man knows the day or the hour. And if we look at the calendar here, this is for September 2015. Let's take a look. The 14th and the 15th, they call it Rosh Hashanah, but in the biblical vernacular it's Yom Teruah. But there's 2 days. You see that? There's Rosh Hashanah 2 on the 15th. Why is there 2 days when it's only one day that the actual event occurs? Because no man knows the day or the hour. It's here on the modern calendars. If you're Jewish, it's as plain as day to you. Let's take a look at the definition of Teruah. The book of Joshua gives a beautiful example here. So the people shouted, Ruah, when the priest blew taka with the shofars. And it was when the people heard the sound of the shofar, and the people shouted, Ruah, with a great shout, Gadol Teruah, that the wall fell. You see, if it's just a shout, it's a ruah. But you add a trumpet or shofar to it, it becomes a teruah. Paul took credit for solving the mystery of what happens on Yom Teruah. He says right here, behold, I'm telling you a mystery. Now he's going to tell us how he solved it. We will not all be asleep in death, but we'll all be transformed in a moment, in a twinkling of an eye, at the last shofar. He's given us a hint of what he figured out. For a shofar will sound. He's emphasizing that here. He's saying a shofar is going to be blowing more than once, and at the last shofar, what's going to happen? He says the dead will be raised incorruptible, and we will be transformed. That's the mystery he said he solved. Let's look at what he said to the Thessalonians. He said, because the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a command, with the voice of an archangel, and with a shofar of God. There you have a voice, a shout, and a shofar. By definition, that is a teruah. And then he says, and the dead in Messiah will rise first. Then we, the living, those who are left behind, will be taken away together with them into the clouds to meet with the Lord in the air, and thus we will always be with the Lord. So you must continually comfort one another with these words. How did he figure this out? How did he know this was connected to Yom Teruah? Well, we have to look to the book of Isaiah to find that out. Isaiah says, open the gates. Any Jew would know when the gates are open, that's a talk of Yom Teruah. Because the tradition is, on Yom Teruah, the gates of heaven are open. They stay open for 10 days, the 10 days of awe. And then on Yom Kippur, they're shut. And it's your last chance to get right with God and to get in good standing where he grants you another year of life. So there's a big clue there. The gates, open the gates. It's Yom Teruah. So the righteous people, only the righteous who are keeping faithfulness will enter. Only the ones who are keeping faithfulness and being righteous are going to enter. Not everybody enters. Think of the parable of the 10 virgins. Your dead people will live. They will rise together with my dead body. We have the dead being raised. Awake. There's another clue. Yom Teruah, it's the alarm blast. Wake up, sleeper. Time of alarm. That to the Jewish mind, that means Yom Teruah. Sing, you who dwell in the dust, for your dew is like the dew of herbs, and the earth will cast out the dead. My people, get out of here. Enter into your chambers and shut your doors about you. Hide yourself, as it were, for a little moment, until the indignation has passed. So we have the people being caught up and entering chambers, and then they're shutting the doors. So we got gates being opened, doors being shut. We have an alarm sound to awake. Paul knew, and the dead being raised, he knew he was talking about Yom Teruah. And what Paul did, he said, well, if it's Yom Teruah, I know there's a shout and a shofar associated. And that is how he solved the mystery. It's on Yom Teruah that all this happens. John had a similar experience as Isaiah, except he experienced the shout and shofar. Isaiah didn't mention a shout and shofar. After these things, I looked, and there was a door, think Yom Teruah, that was open in heaven, and the first voice which I heard speaking with me was like a shofar. We have a voice in a shofar. We have a teruah, by definition, saying, you must come up here. They're being caught up. Sounds like Isaiah is saying, come up here, my people, and hide yourself in your chambers. And I shall show you what must happen after these things. I immediately was in the Spirit, and there was a throne standing in heaven, and one seated upon the throne. Is there any doubt that this all happened, what John experienced, he was caught up on Yom Teruah? This is a very important appointed time to understand what's going to happen and what's going on. Another interesting aspect of this appointed time is it's a time of judgment. It's a time of alarm, and God has 7-year cycles, and if people don't release debts in the 7th year, he waits till the next year on Yom Teruah, the time of alarm, to execute judgment. And we can see this in the recent stock market data for the United States, the top 10 largest daily point losses of the Dow Jones Industrial Average. These all have been since 1997, fairly recent. But notice the first appointed time is 2001. It happened on the eve of Yom Teruah, right when the time of alarm is. This says number 3, but at the time it was number 1, the largest daily point loss. Lost 7%. What happened 7 years later? On the eve of Yom Teruah? Boom. Another 7% loss. 777% lost change. A lot of sevens on this. But here we have 2 judgments on the eve of Yom Teruah that are now ranked number 3 and number 1 all-time daily point losses. God is using this time to execute his judgment. And then look at the rest of what happened. This is listed chronologically. In 2008, right after the eve of Yom Teruah, 10 days later, on Yom Kippur, another appointed time. Look what happens. Lost another 7%. God judged it again. The stock market is rigged. It's artificially inflated to fiat currency. So guess what happens 6 days later, the second day of Sukkot? The stock market is back where it was, and God knocks it down again, another 7% during the Feast of Sukkot. Another appointed time, he judges it again. And then what happens again? The day after Sukkot. Here it happens another judgment. So all of these judgments are on or near an appointed time. Isn't that amazing? And then we run out of appointed times. It's artificially inflated. It keeps getting knocked back up. And so here we are in December, and we have another 7% loss. But notice that the Yom Teruah period starts all these judgments. That's an important time. It's a time of alarm. So it's wake up, wake up to righteousness, but it's also a time of alarm for the world systems. Let's take a look at what Paul said. But concerning the times and the seasons, brethren, you have no need that I should write to you, for you know yourselves perfectly that the day of the Lord so comes as a thief in the night. For when they say peace and safety, then sudden destruction comes upon them, as labor pains upon a pregnant woman. And they shall not escape. But you, brethren, are not in darkness, so that this day should overtake you as a thief. You are all sons of light and sons of the day. We are not of the night, nor of darkness. Therefore let us not sleep as others do, but let us watch and be sober. This is an amazing paragraph. He tells us at the beginning what the subject is, concerning the times and the seasons. He's talking about the appointed times. That is his subject. This whole paragraph is about the appointed times. He doesn't change the subject. He goes on, he says, you know, you don't need me to tell you, you know these times. And then he says, but you, brethren, are not in darkness. Why are they not in darkness? Because they know the appointed times. They know about God's appointments, so that's keeping them from being in darkness. And then he says something amazing. He says, let us watch. Why? What are they watching for? You have to watch for something. They're watching for the appointed time. It's a subject throughout this. And then he says right before that, therefore let us not sleep as others do. So any Jew would know when he says let us not sleep, what is he talking about? Yom Teruah, the time of alarm. The theme is wake up sleeper. So he's saying, if you know to watch for Yom Teruah, then you will not be in darkness, and that day will not overtake you as a thief. Isn't that amazing? We're going to see what Yeshua said. But take heed to yourselves, lest your hearts be weighted down with carousing, drunkenness, and cares of this life, and let that day come upon you unexpectedly, for it will come as a snare on all those who dwell on the face of the whole earth. Watch therefore and pray always, that you may be counted worthy to escape all these things that will come to pass, and to stand before the Son of Man. This is very similar. He says it's going to come as a snare. What did Paul say earlier? It's going to come as a thief. Paul said watch. Yeshua is saying watch. Paul was saying watch for the appointed time, specifically Yom Teruah. Yeshua had been talking about signs in this whole chapter of Luke 21. So he's saying watch for signs. Paul said watch for the appointed times. Yeshua is saying watch for the signs. And he says if you do, you'll be counted worthy to escape if you know to watch. Well, the thing about Yom Teruah, it's the only appointed time that you have to watch. It's the only appointed time you look up in the heavens and you see that tiny sliver of a new moon. So Yeshua is saying basically the same thing Paul said, watch for Yom Teruah.